All right. Welcome to the Degree of Change. We read the Bible, study the Word of God, and apply it to our lives. My name is Chris Parks. I'm going to be leading this session. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be starting off in Genesis. We're going to work our way through Genesis 1 and hopefully Genesis 2. So we're going to take it step by step. Let's get started. Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, well, let me start off by doing this. So we're going to be doing two things. This is what I usually do when I take notes. We have the Word of God here open on the left, and way over here is an example of what I do when I start to study the Word of God. I start off with what's interesting and you can do whatever you want, but I label it in these different categories so that way I know exactly what I'm doing. As we go through and read, I like to go through and just write down quickly the things that I underline. And so whether that's verse 1 or verse 2, or verse 4, doesn't matter. Just make sure you write some kind of notes on, as you read, jot down the verses that are interesting to you. And this will be easy because we're going to go line by line, verse by verse. And so it'll be easy for you to just go through and highlight or label or underline the things that are most interesting. Later on, we are going to write down the main point of what we read for the entire chapter. You can write down several main points if you want. I like to do it for the whole chapter. And then we're going to talk about perspectives. So as we're reading, I want you to keep in mind the different perspectives that are within the chapter that we're reading. And this is important because different perspectives allow you different insight into what's happening. So as we read through Genesis, think about whose perspective we're reading from, whether it's the authors, those who are being impacted in the story. You can apply this with any chapter in the Bible, but try when you begin to read, and we'll go through a lot more of this in other videos, but when you begin to read, try to think about the different perspectives of who you're reading about, what you're reading about, so you can get a greater context for what's going on. That will help you in your research and study as well. So let's zoom back out. Go over here to my notes. Or the verses, I should say. Zoom all the way in. Give me a second. All right, here we are. I want to make sure you guys can see me and see the verses. All right, good enough. All right, now let's get started. Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. Verse 6. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. That's interesting to me, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight that or circle it. Verse 8. God called the vault sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let the dry ground appear." And it was so. Verse 10, God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Verse 11, then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds." And it was so. Verse 11 is interesting to me because I think when he talks about this semicolon is what interests me the most, vegetation. And when God says vegetation, he goes into define it. Seed-bearing plants and trees on the land. And so when God uses definitions, I think it's pretty important because these are his words, not ours. Verse 12, the land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their various kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds. And God saw that it was good. I'm going to highlight that as well. It seems like the Lord has he's very intentional when it comes to seeds. We've seen him mention seed bearing 3 different times now within the span of 2 verses. I like to highlight things like that. Verse 13. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. Verse 14, and God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. Verse 15, and let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. Verse 16, and God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. Verse 17, God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. Verse 18, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. Verse 19, and there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. Verse 20, and God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. Verse 21, and God created the creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which water teems that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. And God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Verse 26, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals and all the creatures that move along the ground. Quick point of order. Verse 26 is what gives us the authority to rule over everything. If anybody ever asks you that, you can point to Genesis chapter 26, where God literally lists everything that he had made previously to this, prior to verse 26. The fish in the sea itself, birds in the sky, the fact that God created the sky and the vault. Verse 26 emphasizes everything that God has mentioned previously, and then said mankind is going to rule over all of these things. So when we say that we've inherited the earth and that everything is ours, this is literally what he means. Verse 27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Verse 28. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, I will give every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, they will be yours for food. Verse 30, and to all the beasts of the earth, and to all the birds in the sky, and to all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. Verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. So let's pause here for just a moment. Let's zoom out. Let's go over to our notes and note down the things that we think are interesting. So I highlighted 3 sections. I highlighted verse 7, verse 11, verse 12, and verse 26. 7, 11, 12, and 26. I'm going to go over here to my notes and just jot that down. Let's see, I thought verse 11. Oops, let me zoom in a little bit more. Verse 11, verse 12. This is what is interesting for me. You all will likely have something that's different. That's okay. The point is that you jot down the notes or the verses that are most interesting to you. And ideally, you would do this as you go through it. I can't because I'm reading and teaching at the same time. But ideally, you would go through this and note these down, so that way later on you can go back and study what you thought was the most interesting. All right. So now that we have that, we're going to skip over the main point for just a moment. I want to talk about perspectives. Because in this chapter, Genesis chapter 1, in my opinion, the only perspective we have, in other chapters it may be different, but there's one single perspective that we have in chapter 1, and that is the perspective of I am. That's the perspective of God. And the reason that's important, for me at least, and this feeds into the main point, we and creatures of the earth were not privy or there to everything that the Lord has made. And so we'll talk about this later on, but Moses essentially wrote Genesis chapter 1 and all of the book of Genesis. And so God was giving not only his perspective, but the reality of what had occurred in the beginning of time, from the first creation of earth. And there is only one perspective, because this is pointing to everything that we learn about later on through Christianity, and that everything is centered around and from God. That's important because as we go through everything else, I think it's important because, one, it helps us realize that we're not as big as we think we are. We're not as important as we actually say that we are, because all of the systems that we have, and this is the piece into the main point, the systems that we have, the sun, the moon, the stars, the seas, the way the seas flows, the tides, the animals, what the animals eat, all of these things are systems that God has put in place from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 all the way to verse 31. We see throughout different verses, and I'm going to go back and actually show them to you so you guys can see it once again. What we're seeing in chapter 1, and this is good for me because I'm very much a type A person, what we're seeing in chapter 1 is the creation of systems, things that will stay in place, that are intended to stay in place for eons being multiple hundreds of years. Which is crazy because for us as humans, we can't really think beyond the span of like 10, maybe 20 years. We may have something that we want to achieve later on in our lifetimes, but it is almost impossible for us to create something that lasts hundreds of thousands of years. The most recent example would be something like the Roman Empire, which even now we're using remnants of their systems, but that has faded and failed, whereas God's systems have maintained and withstood the test of time. Because, one, they're so large and so big, and two, because he's the one that knew how to make them perfect. So going back to systems, God creating first light and darkness, separating what those two concepts mean, creating vaults or spaces between water and between the sky, creating vegetation, creating the things that we're going to eat, the seed-bearing plants, the trees that bear fruit that have seeds in them. The seeds their function is to create more of the thing that they came from. And so we have a system that God has put in place, that he's put a lot of thought into, that will continuously produce, grow, and live, which I think is important. And so, going back to the perspectives that we have, or really going back to the main points, the main point that I'm going to write, and you may have a main point based on what you've read, and that's okay. Main point: God creates, oops, I can't spell. Probably because I'm using my wrong hand. God creates systems. Underneath that, I'm going to write something that I think about that's secondary to that, which is that in all the verses that we've seen, as a main point, part 2b, I guess, God creates order and just having a hard time. Order and structure. He is not a God of confusion. What is going on my screen here? I'll fix it. Hold on. He is not a God of confusion. He is not a God of chaos. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly how he's doing it. He knows exactly what he is creating. And I think that principle, that concept, is important when we talk about, as we go through the rest of the Bible. When you go through the book of Daniel, when you go through the book of Ecclesiastes, Luke, Matthew, even Jesus' life, everything about Jesus' life was structured before he began his ministry. Everything about what God does seems in the beginning to have an order, a structure, a system in place to keep things moving and to keep things in its proper place and order. Whether that's the sun in the way that we orbit the sun, whether that's the moon to give us, some light in the nighttime, or whether that's creating the different seeds that we eat and different trees that we use for medicines, for again, eating, all of those things, wood, lumber, etc. All of these things have a certain place, and they've been standing, they're all continue to be used today. So that's Genesis chapter 1. We'll cover Genesis chapter 2 in the next video.